All right, it's 11:30 Central, so we're going to get started. I know folks are still joining, but we're recording this. We'll be sharing this later, but just to respect people's time, we're going to get started right on time. So welcome to our 1099 webinar. We're going to learn about some of the 1099 changes and processing for 2020. And Debbie is going to step you through how to handle this in Sage. And we're going to show you a new tool that you can use to make it easier to process your 1099s in Sage. Let's begin with our speaker bio. Debbie Mazzullo is one of the principals here at DataQuest Solutions. She started her career in public accounting as a CPA, and she fell in love with helping clients set up their accounting processes. After 9 years, Debbie left the CPA firm and she started Mazzullo Inc. to focus on her passion of helping businesses increase productivity through automation. And in 2018, she and her 3 partners formed DataQuest Solutions. Debbie works with both our Sage and our Acumatica practices. She lives in Maryland with her husband. She has 3 adult children, and she is a passionate lifelong learner. So we're really grateful to Debbie today for taking on this 1099 education. So just a couple community notes before we get started with our agenda is that I'll have our participants on mute just to reduce any feedback, but we're going to be using chat and polling. So we do want to hear from you. Feel free to respond to me directly in chat with any questions you have. I'll be moderating those questions and getting them to Debbie at the end. And if you are going to want to schedule some support with us on your 1099, I'm going to be putting links to our calendar in there so that you can save those and get access to those. Now, a final disclaimer is that none of our content today should be considered as us providing tax advice. We ask you to contact your CPA firm with specific tax-related questions for your company. Our goal is to educate you about the changes in the 1099 form and deadlines, and to empower you to get the job done in your Sage 300 system. So thanks again for joining. We're really happy to have everybody. And Debbie, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much for joining us. Let's get started with our agenda and what I hope that you will learn. So my goal today is to make sure that you are prepared to be compliant with the new rules in 1099 processing, and hopefully I'll share something new with you, a little tidbit that you didn't know before. So here's the agenda. I'm not going to read through everything, but I'll give you a moment to look at it, to know what the expectation is, and then and while we're doing that, Arlene, would you mind pulling up our first poll to see what everybody does know about the new law?
Sure. Okay, our first poll is, are you aware of the new 1099 filing requirements? So I've launched the poll. I'm going to invite everybody to participate and let us know. Thanks, everybody. I'm seeing those results come through. We've got about 12% yes, about 32% no, and 56% yes, but I want more info. So I'll just share those results so we can see this.
Excellent. That's great. That means maybe I can teach you something. So let's take a little history lesson. It's kind of interesting. Prior to 1982, we had 2 separate forms, one for non-employee compensation and one for all other types of reported payments to the IRS. So in 2020, we're actually going back to pre-1982. In 1982, the government decided to simplify things and combined everything onto one form. In 2015, and that was fine for a while, but in 2015, the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes Act, say that fast 5 times, the PATH Act was passed, and the act was to prevent fraud in tax filing. It was becoming very prevalent, and so this PATH Act was established to put in place rules that would prevent some fraudulent reporting on tax returns. There were many things involved in the PATH Act, but 1099's reporting was part of it. So with this act in 2015, the government escalated the filing date for the non-employee compensation, that is box 7 on the one single form, and on W-2s. So both W-2s and just box 7 on the 1099 were due on January 31st. Everything else reported on a 1099 was still due later at the original due date. So the purpose of moving it forward was because what IRS does is match the total of non-employee compensation and W-2s. They match that with what's coming in on your tax return, like your 1040 or your 1065. So there's this matching process of making sure that people are reporting all of their income. So in 2015, the end result is we have one form, a 1099 miscellaneous, with 2 different due dates. Many people, depending on what type of earning was on there, what box was checked. There was a lot of misunderstanding about that, a lot of misunderstanding about the due dates. Penalties kicked in, created confusion. It wasn't working the way IRS intended it to work. So in 2020, we are now going back to separate forms, a 1099 NEC and a 1099 miscellaneous with 2 separate due dates. And we'll see the forms and the due dates as we go through this. So the rules regarding, we know what form to send, but to whom do we send it? So any vendor paid in the course of performing your business to an unincorporated business, so payments to an unincorporated business that exceed the threshold are required, you're required to file a Form 1099. The threshold is $600 for non-employee compensation and rent and many other things, $10 for royalties. There's like 1 or 2 other strange payments that have different thresholds, but those are the popular ones. Employees typically don't receive a 1099 NEC. Corporations, C Corps, S Corps, and LLCs, limited liability companies treated as either a C Corp or an S Corp are exempt. The IRS is getting a lot more serious about 1099 reporting and doing this matching I was talking to you about. So, you know, there are penalties for not filing a 1099 that you're supposed to file. It starts at $50 per 1099, and it depends on how late you are in filing it. But also, if you are audited and they find out you didn't do 1099s, they can disallow that deduction for that payment on your tax return. So they're getting serious. We need to pay attention. So how do we collect this information from vendors? W-9 is used to request taxpayer identification number from vendors. The taxpayer identification number is generally a Social Security number or an employer identification number, but it can also be an ITIN, an individual taxpayer identification number. Those are for people who can't get a Social Security number. It's an individual ITIN. They can be used on a W-9, but they cannot be used on a W-2, or they can be used on a 1099. If you can't get a W-9 from a vendor, then you are required to collect backup withholding and to remit that backup withholding to the IRS. And also just a note, if you know they're publicly held companies, you don't have to collect a W-9 or send a 1099. But a best practice is to always collect a W-9 from each vendor you do business with before you pay them. We suggest that you have a vendor onboarding process of some sort to collect the W-9, the 1099 information, establish your vendor terms, and maybe the accepted payment methods and other pertinent information. So let's see how everybody's doing with collecting vendor information. Can we put the next poll up, Arlene?
Sure. Okay, so our next poll is, do you have a vendor onboarding process to collect your W-9 information? So that's launched now. You should be able to see that pop up in a separate window. All right, I'm getting some good responses here. We've got yes, no, and sort of. Great. Okay. Let's share those results. So 71% of us say yes, and 29% say sort of.
Oh, that's excellent. That is excellent. And I do know you do, because we get asked for our W-9 all the time. So that's great. Okay, so let's take a look at the W-9 just real quick. It hasn't changed since October of 2018, but I just wanted to point out right here, this area 3 here, what box is checked will indicate to you whether you need to be sending them a 1099. Again, C Corps, S Corps, and LLC treated as C Corps or S Corps are excluded from needing to file a 1099. And this form, of course, is available on irs.gov. And it's, for anybody, it sounds like we're all way ahead of the game, but you know, it's never too late to send a a W-9 to a vendor and request that information if you don't have one. Okay, so let's take a look at the new 1099 NEC. Nice and simple. One box, non-employee compensation, that used to be the 1099 miscellaneous box 7. So we have that, and we have the backup withholding, the federal income tax withheld. That's it. Nice and simple. A lot more simple than the 1099 MISC that we'll see in just a minute. So what's included on this non-employee compensation form, 1099 NEC? So payments for services performed by a non-employee, including parts and materials or reimbursed expenses, fees, commissions, prizes, awards, payments to an attorney, but not gross proceeds. So two frequent misconceptions here are the first and the last one. Some people would say, no, I don't include, if my invoice included services and parts and materials or reimbursed expenses, I don't include those because it's not employee compensation. But in fact, the answer is yes, it should be, unless you have what IRS calls an accountability plan. So if you're getting receipts for those parts and materials from the company that prove that they are business expenses, then you can exclude them. But if you're not, you know, remembering that IRS is trying to match gross income to the 1099 reported amount, and the gross income, if they invoiced you for the gross amount, it should be in there. Another issue that is the last one that is sometimes confused is, if you pay attorneys regular fees for service, that would be non-employee compensation. If you get a settlement, and that's called gross proceeds, that's going to be on your box 14 of your 1099 miscellaneous. So let's take a look at the 1099 miscellaneous. Here it is. A little more changes this year. Boxes shift around. It includes everything that it did before, except the non-employee compensation. The box 7 is now different. Let's move on to talking about filing requirements. So, if you are required to file more than 250 or more 1099s, you are required to file electronically. IRS is very much encouraging you to file electronically, whether you have 1 or 250 or 249, but it is required at 250. It's an option for both forms, both the 1099 NEC and the 1099 miscellaneous. The 1096 is not required when you e-file, but of course with paper copies, copy A, which is the filing copy with IRS, you do have to accompany it with a 1096. So let's do another quick poll and find out how everybody filed last year. Can we pull that up, Arlene?
Sure. All right. So how did you produce and file your 1099s for 2019? We're launching that, so we're asking maybe if you printed all the copies in-house on the government forms through the ERP system, or if you printed forms in-house but e-filed. Maybe you used a third-party vendor like Atrix to print and mail, or perhaps you used an external CPA firm. Just seeing the results come in. Looks like we are almost got everybody. So I'm going to share the results. It looks like most folks printed all copies in-house on the government forms through your Sage ERP system and filed a paper copy.
Good. Okay.
But a good amount used a third-party system like Atrix as well, 27%.
Excellent. All right. So let's move on and talk about the due dates for filing. So the due dates are dependent upon how you're going to file. So first note the simplicity of the 1099 NEC. All of the copies and all of the delivery methods are due on the same day, which this year is February 1st because January 31st falls on a weekend. So it moves to the first business day. All due same time. Now look at the 1099 miscellaneous. It is a little more complicated because it's dependent not only on which copy we're talking about, but also how we're filing it. So obviously our recipients still need to get it, the miscellaneous form are still need to get it by January 31st, and the paper filing to the IRS is on March 1st. I've asterisked the ones that are because of the weekend, so it's actually February 28th. But and then e-filing we have until March 31st. So different dates. So to accommodate the new 1099 forms, Sage released last week product updates. And so we have a product update for 2019. So it's 2019 product update 7. 2020 is right, and 2021 should be product update 1. I'm going to show today 2020 product update 4, and we'll just do a little presentation now. I'm going to address alternative options after the demo for those of you who might not be on one of those versions I just talked about. So please bear with me, don't panic. We have solutions for you. But let's go into Sage and look at how Sage is accommodating, and I'm going to point out what's different and what's not different about the 1099 processing. So first of all, in AP Setup, in the options box, this did not change, but I just want to, and when I'm on presentation mode, it opens on a different window, so I'll have to drag over. Okay, so there are on the transaction tab, so AP Setup, Options, Transaction tab, we have 3 boxes here that definitely the top one needs to be checked to be capturing your 1099 information, but probably these 2 are as well, that you want to allow the edit and that you want to default the 1099 amount. The next thing is also in Setup, we have the 1099 codes. CPRS is the Canadian equivalent of our 1099, so I'm just going to refer to it as 1099. So there is a little bit of a change here. So always what ships with, you know, what's there in Sage natively was these codes all these years. So we have, you know, we have each of the boxes basically on the 1099 form. What's new is this tax reporting type and this amount type. So before, everything was based on the box. But now, because we have 2 forms, we have to say that it's a 1099 and that the amount, the payment type the amount type is one of is what's referred to, you know, on the 1099. So this year, our payments are all coded based on these, but for your next year, if you wanted to, you could add new, you know, make the amount type, you know, make this say rents or some coding like that that's more relevant than a box number, because those box numbers could shift again easily. But for now, for this year, you don't have to do what you don't have to change the new codes. You don't want to. You just want to assign the code to the 1099 and to the amount type. So next, in terms of configuring to be reporting, capturing your 1099 information, would be the vendor setup. So on your vendor form, and this there's no changes on the vendor setup, but of course it's very, very important. So on the vendor setup, on the invoicing tab, we have this section down here where we have the 1099 reporting the tax number, which is your Social Security or your EIN or your ITIN. So that's the actual number. And over here, you tell it what type it is. Is it a Social Security? Is it an EIN? You know, what kind of number is this? And then here is where you put, and again, what you're going to see when you click your finder here is those old box numbers. So you want to keep this. I hope I'm not confusing, I'm clarifying, but you don't want to make the change right now because your payments have been coded to these codes. If you would like to make this less confusing for next year, you could, you know, change everybody, but you don't have to do that either. You could add all new codes that aren't related to the box. So what you're this doesn't change, nothing had to change in the setup, you just had to link them to the form amount type. Okay. Clear as mud. Now let's talk about entering transactions. So if you've configured everything properly, there's no changes here. Sage is going to allow you, when you enter a new invoice for a vendor, it's going to allow you to put in the header information. So let me put in a vendor that is flagged as a 1099 vendor. It will open in the header section this 1099 code, tell you what type it is, and then the document amount if you have checked the box in your setup, it will default the 1099 amount to the invoice amount, but they can be different. So you know, I'm going to drop back for one quick second, and I am going to go back to this vendor setup, and I just real quick wanted to add a vendor to show you something. So I'm going to make this vendor, I apologize, I'm going to make this vendor be a 1099 vendor, and I am going to say that it is non-employee compensation and that is a Social Security number. So I just wanted to do that to show you something a little later. I apologize, I missed that on my notes. Okay, so back to vendor transactions. We saw that when we enter a bill, that we have the ability to code it as a 1099 invoice. And I just also wanted to point out that when if you do a credit note or a debit note, you also have the ability to code it properly. But you don't if you do a miscellaneous payment. When you do a miscellaneous payment in Sage, you don't get any 1099 information. So just a caveat to be aware that if you're making miscellaneous payments to 1099 vendors, it's not capturing them on the 1099. So we know that 1099s are based on the calendar year, regardless of your fiscal year. And we also know that they're based on payments during that calendar year, not the invoices. So Sage handles all of that for us. It looks back to the invoice for the coding, and the payment is then included in the year, the calendar year that that payment for the invoice is made. Okay, let's go now to printing the 1099 forms. So if we go to AP vendor reports, we have this print 1099 forms, and we do have some changes here. So you can see we have a form type, and we have both the miscellaneous and the NEC, okay? And we also have new crystal reports, new forms for that match the government issued miscellaneous and NEC form. So you want to be sure you're using the right form with the right form type. And we also have now the ability to print a 1096. And of course, then the 1096 you need for the NEC or for the miscellaneous, and you have the proper form here, 1096 for 2020. So you got to be cognizant of matching up the right stuff, but none of this down here changed. You just print and you will get your proper forms. Now, you must purchase your forms, as you probably all know. IRS does not allow you to print on white paper. You have to purchase the forms. The copy A that is submitted to the government is that red ink, and even the recipient copies need to be on their forms. And if you're just reemphasize that if you're submitting on paper, then you need to also print that 1096. Now, what if you've printed them and you've noticed that the amounts aren't right for some reason? You didn't capture a specific vendor as a 1099 vendor, or a payment got excluded, or a payment got included that shouldn't have, anything like that. To edit the 1099, the 1099s, you go into AP vendors and then into this 1099 query. So there's no changes here. This is exactly what it was before, but I'd like to point out a few things to you that you may already know. You have to choose a year, but you can leave these all blank, blank to ZZZ, and you'll get a, what your end result down here will be of your query is that you'll see one row per 1099 vendor per month, and it'll tell you how many payments were made in that month. So we have June and one payment on this. Our sample data leaves a little to be desired in terms of good data for 1099s. But what I want to emphasize is that you can directly edit this. If this is wrong, you can directly edit it right here. And you can insert. So you saw I set up that, after the fact, I set up that vendor 4000 as a 1099 vendor. So I should be able to use the insert key on my keypad, and I can add a vendor. Once it's been flagged as a 1099 vendor, I can add it here, and I can say, generally, if I do this, I'm just going to do it in one month. The number of payments is irrelevant. You can leave it 0, and you can just put the total amount that should be reported on that 1099 for that new vendor. You can also delete, with by hitting the delete key on your keyboard. Just as far as reconciling your 1099s, people frequently use this vendor transaction report to see all of the payments they made. So, so this report is a very good one to see all of the payments that were made during the calendar year. So you put your date range in, and you have to check this box, vendors with a zero balance and fully paid transactions, to get the results. But this will then show you, every payment that you made to every vendor. It's regardless of whether they're a 1099 or not, but it is a helpful report. And I've got it over here, so I'll slide it over. It's a helpful report in terms of reconciling. So the last thing that I want to show you in Sage is that they actually added the ability to e-file. So under accounts payable, under the periodic processing, we have this 1099 electronic filing. So it will create an e-file for you. It's brand new functionality. Notice that you are required to have what's called a TCC code. So this is your EIN, or well, this is the transmitter's EIN. So the transmitter doesn't have to be you. It could be like your CPA firm or somebody, or somebody that has a TCC code. But you have to have a TCC code in here to generate an e-file. And then you need to make sure that all this information is accurate, and you can generate the file. To get a transmitter control code, there's a process. You go on to fire.irs.gov. The FIRE stands for the federal, I forgot, but it's their electronic filing. It's their online e-filing for multiple forms, not just 1099s. So you have to go through that application process, and they mail it to you via U.S. Postal Service. So technically the date has passed for you to apply for one. You can still try for sure to get that before your 1099s are due. We strongly recommend that you create a test file. Once you get your TCC, you create a test file, and then you can log on to fire.irs.gov and submit your test file and make sure that it is accepted. Okay, so let's go back to a PowerPoint and talk about some options. So options for filing. So you can submit you can paper file, you can e-file if you can get the TCC code. You can, or what many people, and from our survey, it sounds like several of you are doing this, use the 1099 filing service like Atrix. So we're familiar with Atrix. We've used it for years, so I'm using that here as an example. The complete service for Atrix is $1.99. This is just an example of 50, but the complete service will print your 1099 for the recipient, put it in an envelope and mail it. Well, it uses a self-sealed form, but it prints it, it mails it. It actually creates a portal for your vendors to come and get it downloaded to them if they want to, and then it e-files the forms to your federal and state authorities for $1.99 per 1099. So I think most of us would agree that the cost of the form, the envelope, the stamp, the printer ink, the labor of printing the copies is greater than $1.99. So it's a fairly nice service. They also offer a separate service if there's a reason why you need to or want to print your 1099s in-house for your recipients and mail them, perhaps with other information, or if you want to let them do the recipient work and sorry, you can do any combination of these, right? So that you can let Atrix do the work of printing your recipient copies and mailing them, and you submit them on paper form, or vice versa. You can do the recipient copying in-house and just let them e-file for you. But you will need to import your data to Atrix so that Atrix has the information to file. And in the past, this has required some effort to get the Sage 1099 information in the exact format that Atrix or any filing service wants, so that you can import it. Arlene, do you want to move on to the, well, I don't know. Do you have a polling question while I figure out what I just did?
Sure. All right. We do have a polling question we haven't asked yet, which is, we were curious how many 1099s you might be required to file. Less than 50, 51 to 249, or more than 250? All right. Those numbers are coming in. Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay. We've got a mix. About half of us are at 51 to 249, and then less than 50, and the rest are at 250 plus. Okay.
Great. That's informative. Okay. So, how are you going to get this job done is the next question. We with the changes in the 1099, and with if you need to, e-file, what version of Sage you have, we saw a problem, we saw challenges for our clients, and we created a tool. We developed a tool to solve these problems. So the problems we saw was that maybe you didn't set the vendor as a 1099 initially. Maybe you didn't code invoices properly all year long. Maybe you can't use Sage to print because you're not on a supported version, or you don't have that update, and don't want to put that update in. And maybe you're required to e-file, but you don't have a TCC. So DataQuest developed this tool to overcome these challenges. So how it works is that the tool calculates the 1099 amounts regardless of how the invoices were coded. And it prepares a file to import back into Sage to update Sage with the correct 1099 amount, and or uploading it to Atrix seamlessly. So it'll be in the Atrix format that they need automatically without any manipulation. So let's take a look at the way this tool works. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint somehow. Okay, here we go. So what this tool will do is create a workbook automatically. You generates, it reads your Sage database, your data, and it creates a workbook with four worksheets in the workbook. So this is your check register, and basically this has nothing to do with 1099, similar to that transaction list I told you about. This will list all of your payments in Sage, and it is used for reconciliation purposes in terms of making sure everything was captured correctly, but it's just information for you to use in reconciling. This then summarizes by vendor and shows you which vendors were flagged as 1099 vendors, reading back into the master file of the vendor. So it doesn't use how the invoices were coded. It says this vendor was set up as a 1099 vendor for non-employee compensation, and therefore this is the total amount of payments to that vendor. This is their address, all that information. The next worksheet in the workbook is the data that would come back into that inquiry form. So what we would do is zero out what's there and push this back in. Notice in column D, we'd put in everything in as 12. So it would be the calendar year and the month and the total amount for the year for every vendor that is flagged as a 1099 vendor. The last workbook here might be used, might not be. You might just want to print from Sage itself if you have the right version. So you have the right, if you have the update and the version that you need, then you can print out of Sage. But another alternative is to use that Atrix. So here, this file now is in the format that Atrix wants, so it will seamlessly upgrade to Atrix. No manipulation whatsoever. You just click on the import and it will come in. The reason that you would use this one, even if you used Atrix, is so that your Sage import your Sage reporting matches what you filed through Atrix. So what we will do for you is, regardless of how you produce, I'm going to stop my sharing because we're really done with talking about this. And Arlene, you might want to pull up our last poll and just find out whether you think you might need some help. And while she does that, let me explain to you what that we're here to help. This is a once a year task. It's pain. It's a busy time of year for everybody. So however we can help you, we certainly want to help you. But just to explain a little further, if you do want to use that tool that we developed to overcome all the challenges we see, then what we will do is we will install that tool for you on your system, and then we'll generate that workbook for you, and we'll turn that over to you and let you have some time to reconcile and set vendors up as 1099 vendors if they need to be. And then we'll come back when you're ready, and we will help you upload that back into Sage and/or upload it to Atrix, so that you can then go through the process of getting all of your forms printed and filed the way you want them. So do we have, we're happy to talk with you about any kind of help that you need, and just kind of wanted to take a little survey of how people are feeling about things.
Right. Okay, so I'm leaving this poll open. We're getting responses still coming in, so I'll just leave this in for a little bit. Meanwhile, I've got a couple of questions that came in through the chat. Debbie, if you're ready for those?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
All right. Okay. What determines NEC or MISC? NEC or miscellaneous?
So the NEC is non-employee compensation, and as I said, that anything that you used to put on box 7 as payments for services that somebody did for you, for any kind of fees, a non-employee, prizes, awards, that kind of thing. If it's non-employee compensation, it belongs on the NEC. If you look at the 1099 miscellaneous now, it's rents, royalties, like fishing income, some, proceeds to an attorney, like a settlement, different things like that. It does not include the non-employee compensation. I hope that answers it.
All right. How do I know what version of Sage I am on?
So when you're in Sage, you can click on Help and About, and then System Information, and that will tell you what version you're on and what product update is installed. Now, nobody's going to, well, I wouldn't imagine anybody has the product updates yet. They just came out last week, but but that's how you tell what version of Sage you're on.
Okay. I just got a question that I can answer also in the chat. That's how do I schedule support with you on the 1099s? So I just put that in the chat that you can do support@dquest.com, or you can sign up right on Debbie's calendar. You'll probably want to save that. Okay, I got two questions that are kind of related to the tool. How should I decide if I should consider using the tool, and what's the pricing on the tool?
How you should decide, anybody can, we think anybody can benefit from the tool. I mean, probably anybody can benefit from the tool, but specifically, the tool is useful. For example, if you're required to e-file and you don't have a TCC code, then I would recommend using Atrix because it will let them e-file everything. If you're not on version 2019 or higher, you should seriously consider this tool because you will not be able to get be able to print the forms out of Sage. If you have a third-party solution that isn't compatible with the product update, so you may be on the right version of Sage, but you've got sort of a complicated environment and maybe some third-party products that haven't been tested with these last product updates, then you might not want to install them. So this would be a really good workaround for that. You know, if your onboarding process isn't so good so that you are immediately capturing all of your payments, all of your invoices when they come in as 1099 amounts, then this will circumvent that because it will look to the 1099 record for that flag and still pick them up. It will reveal all of your payments to a 1099 vendor. I think those are the main ways. As far as the pricing on it, the pricing is $950. We would love to give you a quote and talk to you individually about this, but we priced it at what we think is a really reasonable and beneficial price, so that because you know, it's gonna solve all those problems, but in addition, it's going to eliminate a lot of work effort on your part. So it's $950 for the first database, and then $200 for every database after that. So we can do it for as many databases as you have, or just one. And as I said, we'll install it. We'll create that spreadsheet for you, turn it over to you, and then walk you through the rest of it.
Okay, and I got a question about basically how people get access to this information that we've just shared. So we'll put that on our blog. I'll include the link here in the chat, but we're also going to be sending this webinar out to everyone so that you can go through this and sort of refresh yourself on the process and make sure that you can follow along with the demonstration in Sage, and so that you're equipped with everything that you need. Any other questions, feel free to put those in the chat, but I just want to close with an appreciation. Debbie, it's been so helpful to have you guide everybody through this. I got so many nice comments in the chat that people were saying that this was really helpful and interesting. So good. Thank you for being our expert and for making the effort to educate our clients on this process.
My pleasure. Yeah, and thanks everyone for attending. That's great.
Okay, thanks. Oh, we're going to close with one last comment I just got. Thank you all, especially Debbie. Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.